great to see you, Doug. I'm bummed we couldn't meet in Atlanta as I was looking forward to this, but this is the next best thing. Um, we've known each other for a decade now, and I'm excited about the chat and getting your perspective on the Duo journey. So why don't we get started and go back to 2009, I guess end of 2009, when you started thinking about this. Take us through how the idea of Duo came about and how did you and John, your co-founder, get started?
Right. Well, it has been a long journey, Kareem. It's 10 years, hard to believe, but if we roll back the clock to 10 years ago, that was actually after I tried to get out of security. And so, I'd started with companies like Arbor Networks, building security for carriers and global financials. Left that industry because I was so disappointed by what it had become. Right, a lot of so many vendors, overcrowded, a lot of snake oil. People buying products they didn't know if they're effective or not, frankly. And anyways, the state of the market was what I would call a lemon market. Right, kind of like a used car kind of market. You buy a product, you don't know if it's good or not until after it breaks down on you or something else happens. And so, so I just found myself so disillusioned with the industry in general. When I left Arbor to go actually join an internet TV company. And so the funny thing is, I came back to security to do Duo after two really formative experiences, right? One, doing the internet TV company, which is all consumer, right? It was all around viral acquisition. It was a peer-to-peer application for TV. And I learned a lot of what it looked like building a different kind of business at scale, managing customer at scale, high velocity, lots of experimentation, heavy design and PR kind of focus. But I came back to security because I saw that the problem had actually shifted. And so, it used to be only the banks and the global carriers or the global financials that were hospitals that were getting hit by all the attacks. But as more and more of the world came to the internet, right, to do business, we saw even small companies getting hit. And so, if you recall, my ambition for Duo was to really democratize security. How can we take security that we used to build for all the biggest and most sophisticated buyers in the world and make it accessible, right, to some of the smallest? And I learned that sort of philosophy from Barracuda. So shortly after doing Zatu, I'd seen the rise of this funny company, Barracuda, that was doing similar. It was building, instead of a $25,000 sort of appliance, like a $2,500 appliance. And but they were just doing it with hardware, all in hardware and with a channel. But what I liked about them, what I saw was super interesting was, heavy ops focus, right? They were kind of doing the Dell build to order model, taking orders in the morning, sending built boxes at night. A lot of really authentic marketing. It looks funny to us, maybe it looked funny to us back then, but taking out airport ads, right? They were the first of those tech companies to take out those billboard ads everywhere.
And I remember.
Yeah, and all those airports. They were wrapping their vehicles with their logo. I mean, kind of like they're like Molly Maid or something else driving around. But to a small business owner, like a small IT shop, it was very authentic, right, in terms of how they're delivering to their needs and interests. And so what I realized was that I wanted to do all that, but without the hardware and channel, building a direct SaaS model, an opportunity to kind of follow the consumerization of IT and kind of do the consumerization of security at a time where more and more smaller businesses and mid-market organizations were really being hit and left with no options, right? They weren't going to go buy a big Blue Coat box or whatever else. They needed to do something different. And so I stayed at Barracuda long enough to actually help buy Paul Judge's company. So Paul Judge, Atlanta security hero, who built a bunch of companies very successfully. But PureWire was a company we bought at Barracuda, and I left to go start Duo because I realized that the time was now, right, to go and start that. But that's how I sort of arrived at that, and it was really almost in a reaction to some of the experiences I'd seen of how the industry had sort of shifted and how IT had shifted and how sales actually had shifted, being more of a product-led motion in the era of SaaS.
You used to do the analogy of the fortress. You've got an enterprise, you build your fortress, you build strong high walls, and all you need to do is to build a better lock, to have a lock on your door. Well, with the modern enterprise, most of those walls have dissolved. You've got mobile workers working from home, et cetera. and people are still the weakest link in securing. So that brought a new set of challenges to Duo at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, we we saw the rise of different security architectures, right, through events like the Operation Aurora breach, right, that took out Google, Yahoo, Dow Chemical, Juniper, Adobe. But back, I think it's '07, I think that's right, when the Chinese basically broke into all those organizations through, again, some very, very simple user target attacks, and left with the crown jewels, all these places. Google responded by basically building a completely different architecture they call Beyond Corp, and so a lot of that was some of the early inspiration for how we evolved our business, thinking about, well, what are the security journeys that organizations will be on as their landscape of employees and infrastructure changes. And so yeah, I think design has been a key focus for us, and I think our fifth hire was actually a designer. And that ratio exists today. At Duo, we have one designer for every 5 developers, which I think sounds high for a lot of engineering teams, but I think it's made all the difference.
Yeah, it sounds high for any enterprise B2B company, actually. But it was a worthwhile investment. Why don't we? I know you're proud to have been able to build the business in your college town of Ann Arbor. What was unique about
our college town of Ann Arbor?
Yeah, yeah, I should say, yeah, our college town of Ann Arbor. What was unique about that environment? Thinking back at it, that you feel gave you an edge, gave you, John, an edge to build a company.
I think there's something strategic about any place it's set up, right? And you just have to figure out what that is, and then figure out how you leverage that. In our case, though we love the Valley, we have friends in the Valley, and we have actually a good number of our colleagues in the Valley. Duo does have a San Francisco office. Ann Arbor was tremendous strategic advantage for us, really for 3 reasons, right? One is that we could be sort of removed from all the noise and the hype cycle that happens in the Valley, where you get distracted, sort of chasing everyone else's dreams, right? Or you hear, oh, did you hear what they're doing? Or this kind of this shiny object syndrome that happens for a lot of founders, I think. So we didn't have that problem because in Michigan, there's nothing to do for most of the year, which is winter. It just didn't work, and just hibernate on your own ideas. The second was really a culture of learning, right? The fact that, U of M's a crossroads of so much amazing talent. And if you can simply keep it there and capture it, right, when it comes and before it leaves, then you really have something. And for, a university that graduates 8,000 engineers a year, it's a tremendous advantage. I always hear from all my friends, like, Evan Cook and, Jeff over at Tullio, Michigan grads who end up in the Valley, how hard it was to continually hire engineers. Like, we didn't have any problem hiring engineers, right? It's like coming out of our ears right here. And so that was one. And that culture of learning brings a lot to it, in that we have lots of different perspectives from which we could solve problems. U of M has an amazing, what's called school information, but a very design-centric kind of approach around UX that we could leverage. And so tapping into those kinds of talent pools and folks who didn't come from tech even, or and specifically security, meant that we bring lots of fresh ideas, right, to how we'd approach these things. And so so that was one true advantage. I think the other was really, what this place is otherwise about. If it's not the university, it's the football program, so the team. And so there's something about that here in Michigan, which I describe as more of like a wine state than more of a beer state than a wine state, maybe like California is, Green. So I think there's a lot about that. Very kind of blue collar work ethic, the team, right? A rallying cry. But here you don't get very far kind of on your own, right? You do it as part of a community, right? And that sort of focus, right, for folks in their lives and careers, I don't think can be overvalued. When you're building a team, like my previous company, Arbor Networks, hired almost 70 engineers myself. We had only 3 leave us in 7 years, right? And at Duo, it's been even stickier. It's kind of amazing. But when we've built these platforms opportunity for folks in a place where they don't see as much opportunity, right, for high growth tech, it's a tremendous advantage for us. And so that sort of work ethic, that sort of team culture is something that I think, we've truly benefited from. And yeah, so I think again, every place has something like this, right? If New York's about money and LA is about fame, DC is about power, San Francisco about disruption, I'd be curious how Atlantans think, if what Atlanta's about. I have my own ideas, but I'd love to hear from someone in Atlanta.
Yeah, no, Atlanta. I mean, we've been actually at GV. We've been pretty active in the Atlanta market, and it's the work ethic is incredible.
Mm-hmm.
But it's I think I agree with you on the Ann Arbor ecosystem. I'm obviously a fan, and it's great that you were able to build, the company, almost entirely there.
Well, one other aspect of that might also be overlooked by a number of folks is, people always commonly think of, well, where's the tech talent? But the other is, how do you build a successful SaaS go-to-market, sort of capability, especially if you're doing it, as an inside sales org. And for us, Michigan was so wonderful for that, because you go elsewhere and you're hiring a lot of seasoned sales leadership and so forth, and which is great, right? If you're delivering to enterprise, and you need to do that. But there's so much opportunity down market. And when we built our inside sales program, Jennifer Lawrence, who now runs actually global inside sales for Cisco Security, but she led that for us. She was able to build this amazing sales career journey for fresh graduates into ADRs, into SMB AEs, into mid-market, finally going to enterprise. And you can do that in a place like this where, again, there's so much talent, right? To be able to enlist into an organization like that. And so that's why secretly LinkedIn has done a bunch in Detroit, and Quicken Loans, right? Dan Gilbert, he didn't build that empire in Detroit just on the basis of technology. It was 11,000 people, most of them sales, right? So
yeah,
and you can do that here.
Yeah, and let's put a pin in the inside sales motion, because I think that's really fascinating and a topic we're gonna touch on a bit later. But if you dive into the actual business, and if I remember after launching product, Duo had a meaningful incubation period. I don't know if incubation is the word.
You're being very kind, Kareem. You're saying that the hockey stick has that long flat part of the hockey
exactly.
stick.
Yeah, I know it took a solid 3 years to see the hockey stick, the explosive growth. And I know there's a lot to unpack here, but I'm curious to get your take on what were the dynamics at play and the key inflection points. The product was really a 3-year overnight success. You want to term it that way, but walk us through kind of what happened in that period.
Yeah. So, to be frank with you, that the first year, I barely even remember what we all did and happened. We call that first year the lost year, Duo. This is before you came in, thankfully. But, we were just trying to build a product and do anything useful. But out of the gate, actually, within the first 30 days, my co-founder John and I, we actually gone out to visit customers, and we ended up closing our first deal without a product. Actually, is with Central Ohio Primary Care Physicians. I think the second or third largest such group in the U.S. Hundreds of doctors in 30 locations, and there was same problem as you're describing, carrying tokens on keychains, right, for all the different clinics and hospitals, and they're going to. And they just wanted to use the device they already had in their pocket, which is a phone. And so we pitched them on basically building a product that would use their phone for that access to their VPN or to log in, whatever, without, again, a separate piece of hardware. And so we sold them on that. It was a $12K deal, our first check. It sat on a wall for a long time. But after that, after securing that first deal, delivering the first kind of POC or first version of the product within probably the next 45 days, we actually didn't sell anything else because we had an outage, right? We had, they were down for an hour. You never want, doctors in a hospital to be unable to access patient records and so forth. And so we stopped all commercial activity and said, look, we have to take this seriously. We invested in building out our team, so we had a very small team, 3-5 people. But we really focused on just getting the basic technology right. After having built out that technology, though, in our next year, it was really around productization, right? And And so there we really tested this kind of thesis out, the number of key customers. And so I think you remember some of them because I think you had heard from, I think your old colleagues from Google about this funny company in Ann Arbor that like Facebook was using, whatever, right? And so what happened was we were starting the early work, building our route to market, actually building multiple routes to market. And in those early days, we tried everything, right? Let's hire literally a gray-haired sales leader. Let's build a direct inbound technical marketing-driven motion via demand gen. But however we were going to do it, we tested lots of paths to customer acquisition any way possible. And the one that we liked, that seemed to work best, was people coming in directly off the website through those acquired leads. And we were doing all the SEM sort of experimentation, like $5 AdWords a day, testing all these keywords, seeing what land, different landing pages, all this kind of stuff. But when Facebook came in under the wire, right, calling us one day out of the blue saying, "Hey, we're Facebook, we'd like to buy the product." We looked them up and said, "Well, but we don't see you in the database. What's going on here?" They said, No. We used that product for 3 months on your free trial, on your free edition, and just change the name of the account. It's under bitch-ass." Like, what is going on here? But very Facebook. But we realized then that there was a motion that we were establishing that was a SaaS under the wire sort of motion that could work. And so we really focused on that next year, really just building out the high velocity and high volume sort of engine. And I was taking some lessons from Zatu, right, the internet TV company I was part of, to try to understand how can we create more of a viral sort of loop, right, and word of mouth. And so the follow-on there was to build a really reference base, right, of customers like Facebook, Twitter, Rackspace, and others came after. But we were really trying to figure out how do we build sort of referral loop back into the business from these existing customers that are been successful. And so it was really around kind of building that, and just to kind of size up what those opportunities look like. We got to a million ARR really just on that, right? On a lot of inbound to go to market, based on inbound marketing. We did kind of cultivate deeper partnerships with certain customers in certain industries. So high tech became kind of our first big vertical, and the second became actually higher ed, right? All the universities and so forth. And then, it progressed from there, some 1 to 3 million to 10 million to 30 million, 72 million, 120 million. So, that was sort of the real ramp. But by the time that we actually had sort of solidified our motion, we were already at 10 million ARR, right? So 1 to 3. And by 10 million, we hired the Zendesk go-to-market team. So recall, we after the Zendesk IPO, they had some leaders that were still there, and some that were had left, but we had, by that point, had identified the motion that we needed to scale. We found a team that had done that before, right? And, but it turned out they weren't in security. Mm-hmm. We looked across, tried to figure out who else has kind of like a 7K ASP, right? Who else has a under 30-day sales cycle for SMB, under 60-day for mid-market, under 90-day for enterprise. Yeah.
Which, if you remember at the time, was pretty remarkable for a security company. I don't think there's been any or many, certainly, that have been successful doing that.
Yeah, and so that was a big inflection point, right? When we figured out the initial model, when we figured out how to scale it by bringing in the Zendesk team, right? And again, those leaders are still with us today. My sales and marketing leader, and again, I gave Jim Siv, my head of sales, the directive. So we're 10. We're going to give you, a little more equity, here, when you hit 30, and kind of sign them up on that basis. And of course, he hits it. A salesperson, you give them a goal, they'll meet it. But that really started that trend again of us tripling our revenue every year, and then basically doubling the team every year. And so really every year was almost an inflection point because. Yeah. Every year we looked around, we're like, half the team's different. It's just, This is a different company. But it was such a fun ride.
Well, if you go back, Duo clearly benefited from a very active user base early on that that you leveraged. And just thinking through some of the other SaaS companies that I see regularly. There's always been a debate on how do you increase user engagement from the beginning. Free tier versus free trial. Some combination of those. In hindsight, if you look back, what do you feel worked best, and what advice would you give others, having seen that movie a couple of times?
Our vision was to be the most loved company in security. And the one metric I had, independent of all the others, ARR and anything else, was actually NPS, our Net Promoter Score. And you'd be happy to hear this, Green, but like we just did another quarterly NPS survey, and we're at 78. Like we're even higher, which is crazy. But we keep going up, and there's no one that regularly sort of lands in the 70s other than maybe the French luxury brands, right? Because like Apple's 66. Rackspace with their fanatical support is 55. And so we've really focused on that and building what we need to do to establish that customer relationship right, over the long term. But yeah, I think it's as much about character and competence. So honoring our commitments, doing what we said we'd do for them, delivering products that work. Really just back to basic stuff. But we took it very, very seriously here.
If the intent, I guess, was of that initial motion was to capture the hearts and minds of the small and the mid market, and clearly, you've seen some big fish also come in through those channels, which was a surprise to all. At one point in this journey, you started looking at the high end of the market and the enterprise. Just walk us through kind of that process and what it took and what you've learned from it as you've pointed the machine in one direction and the focus, and over time started looking up, an area which has more stringent product requirements, lots of process, long sales cycles, a bit different from kind of where we started initially.
Yeah. If you recall, back in 2012, I presented to the board, which is you at the time, a kind of longer term strategic plan of the business, but really looking at, how we'd evolve, like what segments we go after, when and why. And what we determined was, again, SMB, mid-market, enterprise, and then government, public sector. That would be the trajectory, because those requirements do get much more complicated and so forth. And having come from doing Arbor, right, where we sold to AT&T, British Telecom, France Telecom, all those kind of folks, as well as Goldman Sachs and Citibank and so forth. What I realized going directly for the enterprise from the start would be to bifurcate us. Right? We would have to build like a Goldman product, a Citibank product, a Bloomberg product, right? As we did at Arbor. And it gets really complicated when you're trying to build something to scale. Because the way I thought about scaling after Zapti was very different, right? You have to take things that are completely repeatable, and that's how you scale, right? Particularly at velocity and at volume. And so when it came to thinking about enterprise, we thought about it in a slightly different way. We looked to companies like Salesforce, right, where they built kind of a platform, a SaaS platform that was API driven. They could build kind of mass customization, right, to enable enterprises to do what they need to do, but on their terms, right? Like, we'll give you all the tools, but you get to go and build around us, right, versus us having to build for you. And so that was something that was, I think, a very interesting and novel realization for us. And again, we shared a board member with Salesforce, Stratton Sklavos, former CEO of VeriSign. But that Salesforce perspective on how they built a scalable SaaS platform that could go from smallest kind of office to largest global multinational via a API-driven sort of mass customization SaaS kind of platform. That was really the strategy we took, and I think it worked out well. We saw customers like Facebook that got to scale. They were smaller when they first started with us, but who have never used our admin console, right? Like, we have an admin console by which every other customer like manages our product, and most others do. They never use it. They integrated all of it just via API. And again, we saw when we saw that work early, we kind of doubled down on it.
I think you're right, and it was fascinating to see the process. end to end, starting with focus in the market, mid-market really in small businesses that we started at, and then scaling, increasing the bandwidth of what the product can handle and going up market over time. If we fast forward to the end of 2018, I guess business was maturing. It's I think sometime I wouldn't call the business mature yet, but the business was doing quite well, and the company was close to an IPO, and you had a bunch of suitors, Cisco knocking on your door. And I'm curious, kind of at the time, if you could talk through what went through your heads, the process of ultimately selling the business, and led to a successful outcome. If you could just walk us through what was going through your head when you had that opportunity.
The acquisition versus IPO decision was a very difficult one, Kareem. I think it was one where myself, my co-founder and CFO all had different ideas and opinions about kind of the journey forward, and that's fine and normal. And the strength of our relationship and the trust we have in each other allowed us to work through all that in ways that didn't split us up or didn't go sideways. But to be frank, I was building a company for the ages, and my co-founder John and I shared a vision of not just building a better sort of security product in a specific category, what have you, but really revolutionizing the industry. Right? We believe strongly, still do, in fact, that security needs to transform, right, in the way that IT did. In the same way, in many respects, right, toward design, consumerization, all this kind of stuff, consolidation, and we're not there yet. And what we saw was opportunity to accelerate sort of that journey with Cisco, being the world's largest enterprise security business and one of the big titans of tech, and also one of the world's most ethical companies. Very important to us at a time where lots of companies are sort of falling down by that. But when it came to the decision on should we go or not, go IPO or take this other offer that came in, it wasn't just about what people say, like, is the forward multiple worth the risk, right? In the market, do you have a sort of a good cultural alignment? To be frank, I don't think any of that matters for me personally, a founder, as much as whether we really had a shared vision and mission. And Cisco did. They actually had a shared perspective on the security market industry. They wanted what we were working to deliver, which is kind of this much larger change that we thought we could prosecute. And again, I think at the end of the day, great companies are bought, not sold. And your BATNA, your best alternative to negotiate agreement is really should be that you should really want to go and continue to run your company, and that should be your great opportunity. If not this acquisition. And so that's the way we thought about it. So for me personally, it was extremely bittersweet. It was one of those things that I really had to think twice about all this, and it came into lots of personal soul searching about do I want to be a public company CEO or not, and all this kind of thing. But at the end of the day, we have no regrets. We're very fortunate to be part of this larger platform where we can move the market, especially at a time where in this industry there are no more big pure play security sort of platforms. Well, not to say not that many. There used to be, like McAfee, Symantec. These companies are shells of their former selves. And so the big opportunity for us has been to come into Cisco and leverage this platform to really reshape the industry. So that's how I feel about that experience.
Yeah, so I mean, right now you're sitting in a very unique place. You've got a unique outlook on the security market, having gone through all that experience. And we live in this new environment, with COVID and a lot of things not going the right way this year. Curious to get your take on, what's your outlook on the security market, the changing landscape, and what will receive significant attention in the years to come?
I think a lot of it's in the context of the broader macroeconomic environment and the situation we find ourselves in, right, around an era of public health, social, and economic disruption. And so personally, I love building companies in economic downturns. Right? We started Arbor back in 2000. We started Duo on the heels of kind of all this stuff that happened in 2007, 2008. But in this next era, as I do think that there's going to be a rationalization, right, of kind of what's going on. And there has been via COVID. customers need to figure out where they spend their dollars more effectively. They're trying to keep more dollars in their pocket. There's a huge consolidation happening from security that's been bolted on to other products to being built in, right, to some, but now being bundled together, right, by some of the few big platform providers. And I've always said that if we were actually successful as security engineers, we'll have shrunk the market. Right? We'll have reduced the number of things that need to be done. And I think the big change that's happening is that IT platform providers coming for our lunch, right? Like anyone who's doing security as a pure play kind of opportunity today, more and more, it's the big platform providers are working to consolidate. And so, I think I think what's going to drive probably the most value to customers in the long term are the ways in which security can actually work together, can be integrated, architectures that allow for complete different workflows to be accomplished so that small teams can have much greater impact, because no one has time for this. I've always said, like, security sucks, who has time for this, right? And the value we have to deliver to customers for whom increasingly security is important, where it didn't used to be, is much larger market for security today, really. The bridge to that is we have to make it simpler. So design, ease of use, usability, these things all drive, I think, what the success of this market will be next. Not just sort of security effectiveness, right? Can I block all the threats and so forth? Like a pair of scissors taken to your Ethernet cable to cut off your server, that will block all your attacks, right? That's not really what it's about anymore. It's about making sure you've got to herd all the cats, safely. So yeah, I think I think it is going to be a big shift, and I hope that we see more companies that follow Duo's footsteps, not just in terms of growth and outcomes and so forth, but also in terms of how they operate, how they deal with customers, and again, how they find success. So
thanks, Doug. It was great catching up from my office, and I'll hand it back to the folks at Venture Atlanta.